Hi, I'm Pastor Jack Hughes, Anchor Bible Church. We're back for part 2 of step-by-step sermon prep. So I have a document that goes into more detail, but I thought I would just kind of show you on using Word and Logos how I put a normal sermon together. We started already. We kind of took the text, we broke it down into its different parts that I'm going to comment on, create an outline, diagrammed it, and kind of left it there. And so what we're going to do in this video is I'm just going to just begin to kind of show you the steps I take from this point on. I'm not going to make you suffer through the whole thing. We'll come back and I'll kind of show you the end product and make some more comments at the end. But this is going to be the next step. So let's go over here. This is the what we came up with. We looked at the text. Remember, let's see here. We diagrammed the text right here. Let me switch this around here a little bit. There we go. We diagrammed the text and kind of had this outline based on the grammar and syntax of the passage and thought, okay, this is what we're going to talk about. And this is the major points of the outline in bold caps, 15 point. And then we took the text that we were going to study under each point that comes under whatever part of the text comes under each point. We pasted it in, then we did this little S and L. We pasted it and broke up the text into these pieces that I plan on commenting about separately. This then gives me the whole text arranged in proper order with a good outline. And again, we may change the name of the outline points and maybe the proposition or even the title. There's a lot of editing that goes on between now and the end, and we'll see what happens by the time I get to the end. But sometimes when you're studying, as you go through, as you do word studies, as you look at commentaries at the very end, you begin to realize, wow, you know what? I need to change this to this would be more clear or more accurate or more concise or whatever. That's going to happen. But for right now, I'm just getting it down on paper. And at this point, I'm pretty much ready to go. And what I mean by that is I'm ready to start hammering out my sermon, the rough draft. And you might wonder, well, what do you do? How do you do that? Well, that's what this video is about. So what I do is sometimes I may write the opener right away, kind of an opening statement. Something to try and grab their attention. You have people come to church and, they're distracted. They've been swatting their kids in the back seat of the car and they've been rushing and they got there late and, they're having little spats and worried about their pot roast in the oven and if it's going to burn and, that they need to change the oil in their car this week or whatever. I mean, a million things are distracting them. So the opener of a sermon is really not officially part of the sermon. It's just kind of the front porch leading into the sermon house. It's just your way of getting them engaged, captivated, and focused on what you hope to teach them from the text. So that's what the opener's about. It can be a contemporary story, an old story, historical one. It can be a series of rhetorical questions. It can be a quote, a poem, whatever you want. And sometimes I have a really good opener in mind that comes to mind before I even start working on the rough draft of my sermon, and I put it in there. Now, sometimes I do that and then I realize it doesn't fit very well and I erase it. It's okay. At this point, I don't really have anything directly that I want to put in there, so I'm going to wait because by the time I work through the whole sermon and get my rough draft, I'm going to have a lot better idea of what I'm trying to get people to focus on, to understand. And after I read my commentaries and refine it, I'm going to even have a clear idea of what I want to, teach people and get them focused on. So at this point, I'm not going to do the opener. The background and context, I am going to do that, but I'm not going to make you suffer through it. because I've been doing an exposition of the book of Revelation and teaching verse by verse and phrase by phrase in some instances, that my congregation is really caught up and very well aware of the book, its flow. Nevertheless, I realize that we're going to have visitors. We're going to have people who haven't been there very long and people who might just listen to one of the sermons online. So what I want to do is I want to give them enough background and context so that they are oriented to the text in the flow of its context. So for instance, I might say something to this effect. In chapter 6, we saw that the 6 seal judgments began to be unleashed upon the earth. And we ended chapter 6 with the 6th seal. Then in chapter 7, we have an interlude. And in this interlude, we are told that there are 4 angels who hold back the wind so that the earth, the sea, and the trees are not harmed. And God tells them to hold back the judgment until his bondservants can be sealed. That's in the first 3 verses of Revelation chapter 7. Then, in the text that immediately precedes our text for today, God says, okay, let me tell you who these bondservants are that are sealed. And in verse 4, he says there are 144,000 Jews from the 12 tribes. And then he lists the 12 tribes that 12,000 each come from. We also talked about the whole mystery of why the tribe of Dan is left out and why the tribe of Levi is included, which is almost always left out of the other lists in the Bible, and why Joseph is included and not Ephraim. So if you want to learn about that, you can listen to last week's sermon. So now we've kind of talked about the postponement of judgment. We've talked about the 144,000 Jews being sealed. And we've talked about then in the very near context of our text, God having this amazing worship. He is on the throne. God the Father and the Son are on the throne, on the crystal sea. The elders are on thrones around the crystal sea. Underneath the crystal sea are the 4 living creatures. Surrounded and before the throne are the saints, clothed in white. And then we have beyond them the myriads of myriads and 10,000 times 10,000 of angels worshiping on the throne. And this is where we left off last week. Okay, so something like that. I do that. I put it in there. I type it out. And then maybe I realize, it's a little bit too long. I don't want to spend this much time. I might condense it a little bit, refine it a little bit, whatever. But what I'm trying to do is give people contextual information so I'm not just plucking the text out of its context, but showing it in the flow of its context so that we understand this text in light of its context, because context is king. Context is what gives meaning to words and texts. And so that's what I would do in the background and context. Then what I do is I would read the passage to my congregation, and I often pray right after that. Let me just put that in there. Pray. Let me bold it. Pray. There we go. So I read the text, I pray, then I give my proposition. Remember, you have your title, which kind of summarizes what the sermon's going to be about. But the proposition is kind of just a short statement that tells people what you are going to tell them succinctly. And what I do is a second person, plural noun, proposition. So we talked about that before, where we have second person. Do you see the you there? Right there. You. There it is. That's a second person. I want them to know this is about them, each one of them that I'm preaching to. This is about you. And there's three different characters. There's my plural noun right there. Three different characters right there. Three different person, places, or things. And this characters. And of course, the characters that we see in the text are the elders, the saints, and God. And then we have a so that statement. This is a purpose statement. I like to include this in my propositions because I want to think about the text in light of the so what factor. So what difference does it make to the junior hire, to the college student, to the young married couple, to the family with kids, to the empty nesters, to the grandparents, to the guy at work, to the housewife? What difference does it make? Why does this text matter? Is there any functional purpose? Well, all Scripture is profitable for teaching, reproof, correction, and training in righteousness. So how does this profit us? I want to make sure I put a so that, he's a general in there, so that they know. Now, as I work through the sermon, I'm going to be thinking about different ways it might apply. Sometimes the application comes at the end, but usually I put application in all the way through. So we talked about that. Then I also have these main points here, which relate to the main points that come directly from the text. I put these in command form. See, hear, marvel. I do that because I not only put second person in my proposition, I like to put it in each of my main outline points. Why? Because I want people to think how this text applies to them. I'm not giving them a lecture about people who are dead. I'm not here to just talk about ancient things that are irrelevant to their life. I'm talking to them personally. Preaching is personal, confrontive, bold, authoritative, heralding of the truth of the Word of God in a reproving, rebuking, correcting, admonishing way, showing people their sin, revealing their sin to people so they confess and repent. I know a lot of people don't like preaching like that, and it's because they don't like preaching. But that's the purpose of preaching. A lot of people think preaching should make them feel good. No, it should expose your sin. That's what preaching is for, to expose your sin. There's a whole other video. We'll go into that later. All right, so now we're back here. We've got our outline. We've broken down our text. Let's say I've left the opener free, and I decide to put some background and context in there. It might be a little long, a little wordy, but I'll just leave it there for now. And if I need some more space and I'm running out of space, which I do every week, I might cut it back some. I pray, I read the proposition, I jump into point 1, see the saints clothed in white. Now, what am I going to do from this point on? I start interpreting the text. I usually start with word studies and meanings, interpretations, and I just start working through. So I'm just going to do this a little bit. We're going to shut down, and then I'm going to go through the whole thing, get my rough draft done, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what I ended up having for my rough draft. All right? So let's look here. Look at verse 13, where we see that one of the 24 elders has a question for the Apostle John. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me. Now, right here, I have this little S, which means for stop, and I put that there because I want it to be back into 15 point again. So I'm just going to comment. The congregation knows who these elders are, so I'm not going to belate this. The things that I've already covered multiple times in preceding sermons, I'm just going to give a brief description to. If I haven't covered it in preceding sermons, then I might go into it in more detail, or if I haven't covered it in a long time. So I write here, let's say, this elder is one of the we've seen earlier in the book. Okay, that's all I say. That's all I'm going to do. I don't need to go into the word studies of the elder answered and saying and get into the verb tenses. I don't need to do that. It's not critical. It's one of the elders is saying. I might go into more detail, but right now I'm going to call that good. I go to the next phrase that I want to comment on. Look towards the beginning of verse 13. And I say to myself, look at the beginning of verse 13. Now I'm going to talk about where we see, what the elder asks John. These who are clothed in white robes. Now, I look at this, I thought, well, I have it broken down there. Who are they? I'm just going to erase this right here. I'm just going to connect and put these two together. I just want these. Who are they? Okay, I'm just going to leave that there. I don't need to comment on who are they separately because it relates to this, and so I'm just going to comment on that. Who are they? Now, right now, here we see asking John about the identity of those clothed in white who are standing before the throne. Now, at this point, I need to go into those clothed in white. And here he says, where have they come from? Okay, so who are they and where have they come from? And what's great is we were going to find out exactly who they are and where they come from. If you come over here, one of the answers, my Lord, I mean, he says so right here. These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So, I think, well, I just need to state the obvious, which he goes down to tell us in verse 14. But what I'm going to do right now is I don't want to talk about the same thing here and that I'm going to talk about in the next point. So I'm just going to say the elder asks about those clothed in white who are standing before the throne. We have already learned that those clothed in white are those who are forgiven, redeemed, purified, glorified, and in heaven, the saints. Okay? So I just identified who the saints were, who are those clothed in white. And then when I get a paragraph and it gets much longer than this, I break it up just so that when I'm looking at my notes, if the paragraph is too big, it's hard for me to find it. But in a paragraph like this, I can just look at it and just get a snippet in my mind and go for it. So what I'm going to do now is just say, we will see exactly who those clothed in white are in our next point. But now John, or the elder, asks John another question. This is my transition between this phrase and that phrase. Look at the end of verse 13. And where have they come from? So the second part of the elder's question is where those clothed in white have come from. Obviously, they are new arrivals in heaven. And they have just received their white robes, and we will learn from where they come from in our next point. But look at verse 14, where John admits, I said to him, my Lord, you know. John, at this point, doesn't seem to know who these saints are that are clothed in. Who saints are who have just been clothed in white as new arrivals to heaven. Okay, there we go. That's it. Notice how I'm just interpreting it. I'm just putting stuff down. I may think of cross-references. I may think of illustrations. I may think of, whatever I think. I just put it in there. I put it in there. And notice I'm not even looking at logos or anything. I'm just going through phrase by phrase. I'm going to do this through the rest of all these phrases. And some of them, especially these ones down here, I'm going to get into more detail and maybe develop doctrines, maybe put in quotes, all these things. So what I'm going to do is I'll be switching back and forth. Let's say I'm here. This is what we just went through. I said, Lord, you know. He said to me, these are the ones, this is the answer. These are the ones who come out of the Great Tribulation. So I'm going to talk about this phrase, Great Tribulation, because Jesus in Matthew 24 speaks of the last 3.5 years after the Antichrist commits the abomination of desolation. He says, then there shall be great tribulation. Now, some people will say that's what this is referring to, so this can't be happening earlier on. But you need to remember, Jesus isn't saying in Matthew 24, let's just go there. Let's see, Matthew 24:15. When you see the abomination of desolation which was spoken of by the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Those in the house must go down. Whoever must be in the field must turn back in the cloak. We're going to learn about this fleeing to the mountain stuff in Revelation chapter 12. So in Revelation 12, the woman is persecuted by the dragon, and she has a place prepared for her in the wilderness where she is to flee. That's what Jesus is talking about here. What are those who are pregnant? Of course, you can't run very good if you're pregnant, holding your baby, nursing a baby, whatever. But then notice what Jesus says here. He says, then there will be great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. So notice he says there will be a great tribulation. He doesn't really define it as the great tribulation. It's just there's going to be the greatest part of the tribulation towards the end. In our text, when he says great tribulation, I think, and again, I haven't read any commentaries, but my take is those who come out of the great tribulation, because we haven't even got to the midpoint. We haven't even seen the abomination of desolation yet in the book of Revelation. We're getting there. We're still in the latter part of the seal judgments. The seventh seal judgment, which gives birth to the trumpet judgments, hasn't happened, and all those 14 judgments happen before the midpoint when the Antichrist commits the abomination of desolation. So what I'm taking this to mean, who come out of the Great Tribulation, the elder is using this as he describes to John where those clothed in white have come from, and he uses the Great Tribulation to describe the whole thing, all of Daniel's 70th week, the time of Jacob's trouble, the Great Tribulation. And the other part of the question, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So we're going to talk about that. So at any point here, I might say, okay, let's say I want to do like a word study. And I want to look at, thlipsis or whatever, great tribulations. This is a mega thlipsis, and I want to do a word study. If I right click, and this is how Logos works, whenever you right click on a word, it gives you this panel, which is in two parts. This tells you what is selected. Do you see how this is slightly highlighted right here, the reference? I want this right here. This is the lemma. So I want to select the lemma. The lemma is what appears in all the theological word books, word study books, to show you what a word means, because there's a lot of different prefixes or suffixes added onto words, and you don't want to do a search of just what's in the manuscript, because the lexicons always use a certain form. So the lemma is the form you want to look at when you want to do a word search. So I have this selected now, and notice it gives you a brief definition: affliction, distress, and it even transliterates it, thlipsis. And then you can do a Bible word study, which appears down here. I'm just going to open this up so you can see this. So here are kind of my different theological lexicons right here. I have prioritized these, so the ones I want up front, and then they kind of get more and more either obscure or more heavyweight. So I kind of have the enhanced Strong's lexicon here. I have Vine's Expository Dictionary of Old and New Testament Words, Bauer, Gingrich, and Danker. You can see that the Tyndale Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, abridged, and down here, Lau and Nita, whatever. So I can just go down through and hit whatever. But if I put my arrow on here, it gives me the entry. So I don't even have to click on it. If the entry isn't too large, it gives me a sampling. So I can read right here what the word means: tribulation, affliction, trouble, persecution, anguish. Okay, I can go down here and say, okay, what is it? And notice here the word thlipsis doesn't show because it's too big. So I'm going to have to go over here. This is Vine's right here. Let me open it in a floating window and make the font bigger so you can read it. There we go. So I go down here and I'm looking for what's in our text, right? I'm looking for this word right here, thlipsis. Primary meaning: a pressing, a pressure, anything that burdens the spirit. And two passages Paul uses of, and you just hover your thing and it'll show you what the passage is, which is nice in Logos, so I can just see what it is. The verb to be afflicted, under tribulation, whatever. I go down there, I do that. Anyways, I'm going to go down and I'm going to hit this right here and do my word study. And if I want, I can actually do my own word study by adding a note here and creating my own custom definition based off of all these resources. And then whenever I look at this word, I'll have my definition as well. So sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. But the whole point is, that's how easy it is to do a word study. I can just hover over, like, they have washed, and I can see at the bottom where the Bible text ends. Do you see it at the bottom? I can't point to it with my arrow, because if I do, it will disappear. But when my arrow is on a verb, notice it parses it. It's a verb. It's an aorist active indicative. There it is. Their robes, and here it is. Made them white, aorist active indicative, in the blood of the Lamb. Now, if you don't know Greek very well, there's a way you can kind of cheat your way through this. And let me just show you how to do that real quick. So Logos has different helps, different guides, tools and guides. So if I click guides right here, do you see this exegetical guide? Okay, let's put our text in here, or we're just going to do Revelation. What is our text anyways? It's 13 through 17. Let me just do 13, there it is, through 17. Ha! Look at that. So here we have some of these I don't expand because they're They're a little laborious, but this is the text and this is the English. And notice when I hover over the Greek, it shows me what English word to the right is being considered. So if I want to look at one of these words here, they are clothed in white, where they have come from. My Lord, you know, these are the ones who've come out of, let's do our tribulation thing here again. So you may not know Greek. So the words to the left may seem like, well, that's beyond me. But you can read, you want to do a study of tribulation. So I'm going to click on this. And notice what it does is it highlights these words. It shows you thlipsis right here. It gives you a transliteration of it in the English. It even pronounces it for you. Check this out.
Thlipsis. Thlipsis.
Thlipsis. So you have thlipsis. I don't know if that came through on the recording or not, but hopefully it did. Then it parses it for you, or, gives you the, conjugates it for you. Noun, genitive, singular, femular, positional. And when you put your arrow on here, it tells you what each thing is. Gives you a nice definition. So even if, let's just go to washed here. Even if you didn't know,
Pluno.
wash, it's a verb, action word, aorist, something, a snapshot of time. If it's aorist indicative, it usually relates to past time. It's active. Grammatical voice signifies the subject is performing the verbal action. That is, whoever's doing somebody has washed them. God has washed them. Okay. Indicative. It tells you what each part is. So even if you don't know Greek and you've never taken it, you can still find it out to wash. Okay. Then these are all the same word study books that we saw before. And I can look at these and get the exact definition that I need until I understand what the word means. Okay, so I usually don't use the exegetical guide because I have taken Greek, and sometimes I do when I'm like, you know what, I need to I forget how to, this is a odd thing. This gives you a little bit more, but this also gives you commentaries. So this is what is neat. It gives you journal articles that relate to it. So you can, there's a lot of stuff here that you could really jump into and kill yourself off on. So, I could go to the Ashland Theological Journal or Westminster Theological Journal. So I need to say, well, what is the hermeneutics of those giving this article? And so a lot of times I don't read it because most of the reformed leaning things, they spiritualize the text, and I just don't go for it. The prophecies that have been fulfilled literally, and I think all the prophecies that will be fulfilled literally. So that's my take, and in general, so I usually don't look at the commentaries that are going to spiritualize the text because I think it's a waste of my time. All right, so now I have this exegetical guide that I can use, but I can also go here to the passage guide, and I can do Revelation 7:14, and it'll just do what's following. But notice the word studies, word pictures, MacArthur, New American Commentary, Tyndale Commentary, Wiersbe, Cornerstone, NIG, Baptist Commentary. Let me just go down more. Matthew Henry, more. More. Okay, so I've got some stuff here. Now, the ones I like the best are the ones that are up top here. And as they get down, then you get guys who start spiritualizing the text, and so I quit reading it. I just don't go for it. They got to have a literal, historical, grammatical, contextual method of interpreting in prophecy. Otherwise, I'm not going to do it, because once you reject what the text plainly says, if the literal sense makes sense and you seek some other sense, then you just turn this text into nonsense. So I have other paper commentaries, which if I was in my study, and I'm not, They're just right at my right hand, whatever book I'm going through. So I start pulling those off. Robert Thomas, Mounts, Phillips, Bullinger, I just pull them off and start reading those in addition to the ones here that I like. And I do that at the very end of my process. So once I get the whole thing kind of interpreted, then I pound down all these commentaries. But first, I want to get it interpreted. And if I need to do any word studies, I will do them. I will, shoot over here and, say, okay, I want to do a word study of tribulation or whatever. Notice how I have 2 tabs here with the NASB. Why is that? Why am I doing that? This is the reason. This one right here, notice, is not linked. This has a little A, and it's linked to all these other resources. So if any of these resources change, they all change with this text. See how the Greek is changing when I scroll up? They're linked together. So when I'm searching around and I'm doing cross-references and things like that, I use this NASB. But if I click here, this just stays here. It's just the text. It's not linked, so it's not always going to be moving. So I just leave this as to what I'm studying, the text I'm studying. So if I do a search, let's say I want to do a search, and over here I have different tabs with different searches. Notice you've got all these searches, like what is that? I can click on these different things and do searches, but this one here searches the whole Bible, the American Standard, all Bible text, so I can do a search. This one here usually takes the verse. This is the range. It's only searching the book of Revelation. See right there? But I can type in here all passages, Old Testament, Exodus, any book of the Bible, all the epistles of Paul, the non-Pauline epistles, whatever I want, I can put in there. But I like to just do Revelation. And so I'm going to do white robes. There's all the text with white robes. So if I'm going to do a study of those clothed in white, notice they've already been mentioned in chapter 6, and so I'm going to go into quite a bit of discussion. I'm going to put this into my sermon. I'm not going to do it now. And this is our text. Actually, this is the near preceding context of our text. This right here is our text. And so this right here is white. But let me just try white, because I think there's white raiment in the book of Revelation. Now, that Jesus' hair was white like wool. You got a white stone. Here you got the white garments. So not robes, but garments. So now notice how I get a better cross-section of cross-references, because now I'm getting all the text with white garments, white robes, white raiment. So if I go down here, I'll see you got white horse, white robes, made them white in the blood of the Lamb, white cloud, white horse, white and clean, fine linen, white and clean. See here it's linen, and the great white throne judgment. So I can get this verse here, Revelation 19:14, and all the verses here that talk about white robes, white garments, white fine linen, and kind of have a little systematic theology on the saints wearing white in heaven. So I'm going to do that. Anyways, I'm going to go through. I'm going to pound this all out. I might go through it again and refine it a little bit more, because I want to make sure that I interpret the text in light of what I think it means based off of my study of the text in its context. Commentaries are not there to do your work for you, but to check the work you have done. Let me just say that again. Commentaries are not there to do your work for you, but to check the work you have done. So I want to do my own work, do my own initial interpretation, pound everything out, do word studies that I think are relevant or whatever, and then I use commentaries to check my work. Now, since I'm preaching in Revelation, I try to use commentaries that have the same hermeneutic or way of studying the Bible I do, a literal, historical, grammatical, contextual interpretation. And of course, if I had a spiritualizing hermeneutic when it came to prophecy. I'd use other works, but I don't, so I don't. So anyways, that's what I do. I'll read all those commentaries, and I might adjust interpretations. I might completely change them. I might add good cross-references, illustrations, comparisons. I might put quotes in. All of that stuff is going to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop now. And I've kind of explained to you and even shown you a little bit how I kind of start developing the text, how I do some word studies, things like that. And then we'll come back and I'll kind of show you my rough draft. That'll be the end, and you'll be able to see, okay, this is his rough draft, and you'll be able to tell what it looks like and see what it looks like. And I'll make a few comments at the end of this video after I study for 3 or 4 hours, and then we'll shut down, and then we'll do another video, and I'll show you kind of the end product. I'll show you a little bit at the beginning how I start. I've kind of already done it a little bit, but how I start reading commentaries and start with kind of word study ones, and then I kind of go into expositional ones and critical ones, and I'll talk about commentaries and stuff in the next video. So hopefully this is helpful. This is what I do, and I'm gonna, usually by the end of Wednesday, I've got my rough draft all the way or mostly done. Now, because I'm making these videos, I am behind, but I'm going to get done. I'm going to do it this week and suffer through it. But I don't really like studying all day Saturday, but anyways, it has to be done. Usually I study like 5 or 6 hours on Saturday and then try to have some time off, but I have a feeling this may be different this week. But anyways, we're going to shut down here, and part 3, we'll show you the rough draft, and then we'll show you looking through some commentaries, and then we will wait and I'll show you the product after I go through the commentaries. Then I might even show you after that just a little bit of kind of the finished product, how I go through and highlight things and all that. So there you go. Until next time, stay in the Word. Okay, we are back, and yesterday after I stopped the video, I studied a little bit, and then I had a radio interview, and I studied a little bit, and then I had a meeting, and then I studied a little bit, and then I studied a little bit more this morning. It's Friday, and so I pretty much have my rough draft done. Usually Friday morning, I hope to be at the place where I can just read commentaries and go through it, my sermon notes, and just add and refine. But I want to show you what I have. I haven't looked at any commentaries yet. I'm just going to go through this quickly, kind of explain some things. This is just the end product. Remember, we looked at the text, we broke it down, I did a diagram of it, I kind of did an outline. Then we did our sermon title, and then we did our text, and then we did our proposition and our major outline points. Then we took the portion of the text to be commented on under each outline point. We pasted it in there, and then we broke it up into the fragments that I want to comment on when I'm preaching. Then I've gone through and basically just interpreted it off the top of my head, only doing word studies to figure out a few things. So I'm just going to point out some things. I'm not going to go through the whole document. I started doing some formatting stuff that I like to do, and this will become more formatted and more refined because I end up going over it usually 5 or 6 or sometimes 7 times to get it so it's packaged well and proportional and has application and the gospel and all that stuff. So we're just going to jump in. Down here, you see the saints clothed in white. And before we wrote this little introduction, then one of the elders said to me, the elder is one of the 24 elders we have seen earlier in the book, and we will see later as well. Look towards the beginning of verse 13, where we see what the elder asked John. These who are clothed in white robes. Who are they? Here we see the elder asking John about the identity of those clothed in white, who are standing before the throne. According to verse 9, we have already learned that those clothed in white are those who are forgiven, redeemed, purified, glorified, and in heaven, the saints. Remember Revelation 3:4, and now in this section, I basically do a little systematic theology of those clothed in white. I hit the key verses in the book of Revelation, Revelation 3:5, 3:18, 4:4, 6:11, 7:9, and 19:14. Those are pretty much all of them. And later on, if I discover my sermon notes are too big, which happens pretty much every single week, I may have to condense this or cut this out or just summarize it in a single sentence. I don't know yet. But right now, I've put it down there. So I talk about the identity of those clothed in white, and then I have look at verse 13, and where have they come from? The second part of the elder's question is where those clothed in white have come from. Obviously, they are new arrivals in heaven, and they have just received their white robes. Okay, so we know this. We go back, that's the case. They have come to Christ somewhere from the beginning of the tribulation to the end of the sixth seal judgment and been martyred, which is pretty amazing. But John admits, he says, maybe John knows and doesn't want to say anything, but probably doesn't know. So he asks the elder, and now I just ask a question here. I want to have some so what factor in my sermon. I don't want to just give people facts and data and send them home like, now you know a lot of facts about the text. Remember, all Scripture is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness. So when I talk about a text, I want to get to the so what. So notice what I do here. I sat there, and after asking these two questions right here, but what can we learn from the fact that the saints are said to be clothed in white? How can this encourage us? So I just thought about it. I meditated on it. I wrote down some bullet points. Then I blew out the bullet points. So let's see what I did. We can be encouraged that God knows those who are His. I talk about that thing, that God knows those who are His, I talk about how even the apostles, who are, spiritually speaking, probably some of the greatest, most privileged people who ever lived, they were chosen by Jesus, trained by Jesus, lived with Jesus, commissioned by Jesus. They had the gift of prophecy. They had apostolic authority. And yet, in 1 Corinthians 4, 9 through 13, they're exhibited as least of all, condemned to death, spectacle of the world, fools for Christ, weak, hungry, thirsty, poorly clothed, roughly treated, homeless, toiled, reviled, persecuted, slandered, the scum of the world and dregs of all things. How can that be? You may be a Christian living in this world, and you may have a hard life because this world is not your home. You are aliens to this world. Your world is in another place. So even the apostles, though they were the most privileged and exalted, and they'll have gates named after them in the New Jerusalem, nevertheless, they're the scum and dregs of the world, but only for a short time. So I talk about that eventually those who are the least, the scum, the dregs in this world will be the greatest in the kingdom. They will be clothed in white. Secondly, God will never leave or forsake those who are His. So I just talk about this. Jesus said, I'll never leave you or forsake you. And sometimes in this life, you might think, where's the Lord? And why doesn't He rescue us? And why doesn't He care? Because we're having to suffer trial or the consequences of sin or the consequences of somebody else's sin. We're suffering. And yet, the fact that these saints who have just come out of the tribulation, a very difficult time, and been persecuted unto death, they may have had some of these thoughts. How come God doesn't rescue us? Why isn't He protecting us? But you know what? Where are they now? they are standing in God's presence, blameless with great joy. And they are learning that the Lord has never left them, and He has not forsaken them, that it's appointed for men to die once, and here they are, in glory. Third, regardless of what your life may be like in this world, even if you know the Lord, eternal glory awaits us. Yes, we are weak and often failing and disdained and suffering, sick, disease, whatever, and yet we're going to be with the Lord forever. That's super encouraging. For even though we are great sinners in this life, have to suffer with our sin-cursed body of death, we will be delivered, made pure, sinless, and holy in heaven forever. I mean, that's amazing. 5, because the saints are clothed in white, having died in the tribulation, it tells us that they're not invisible spirits, but have some sort of heavenly form, even though they have not received their glorified bodies yet. A lot of people think that we're just some invisible mist in heaven. But how do we know that? Even though we don't have a glorified body yet, we're in heaven, it doesn't mean we're invisible. Earlier we heard of the souls under the throne crying out for vengeance, for the Lord to take vengeance on those who dwell on the earth, who killed them. And here we see these people have a location. They're before the throne. They're wearing white robes, so they seem to have some sort of a body, and they're able to cry out with a loud voice, which we saw earlier also. So I think they have some sort of luminous, heavenly body, maybe like the angels, I don't know. It's not their glorified body that they will receive at the resurrection. Because these have come to Christ and died during the tribulation, they will have to wait to the second coming of Jesus Christ. But it's encouraging to know that we're not going to be little bits of invisible mist in heaven until we get our resurrected, glorified bodies. We have some sort of form, we have location, we can speak. There you have it. Secondly, this is my second point, know the identity of those in white. And again, I'm not going to belabor this. I kind of spent more time on the first point. But notice how I just developed it. I just sometimes when I'm reading a text, remember I told you that whenever the text is 12-point bold blue, I know I'm going to read it. And sometimes I put comments into the text as I read it. So for instance, Matthew 24:21, Jesus says, "For then, after the Antichrist commits the abomination of desolation according to Matthew 24:15, we will know what happens in the middle of the tribulation." And we know that happens in the middle of the tribulation, Daniel 9:27. "There will be great tribulation such as not occurred." So notice how I just inserted those comments as I'm reading the cross-reference. I talk a little bit about the tribulation, talk about those things. In this point here, look at verse 15. "For this reason," because more comments, "because they have been forgiven, cleansed, washed, made holy by the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ for their sins, they are before the throne of God." So knowing Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior ensured that they would be washed by His blood. All of their sin, guilt, corruption, and curse, are taken out of the way. And I could just put that in there. Are taken out of the way. There we go. The only way any of us can stand before the throne of God is to be washed and cleansed by the blood of the Lamb, Jesus Christ. Jesus' death at the cross, So I just put this notes in here, and then I put in here scriptures, because this is a good place where I could add some scriptures about, Christ died the just for the unjust in order to bring us to God, text like that. That He died for our sins according to the scriptures, was buried and raised on the third day according to the scriptures, that we believe that we've been saved. And then this is a good place for a gospel presentation. So I just put some notes there because I want to see how much room I have left. I'm just beginning, but this is where I'm probably going to put my gospel presentation. I try to put at least one place somewhere in the sermon, a gospel presentation clear enough that someone could get saved. And if not, I even do it in the prayer. Like there's sometimes it's so focused on believers, and I don't want to break out to kind of do this gospel presentation. I just talk about the believers and they're being saved by grace, and then maybe in the prayer, I'll give a gospel presentation. But I try to usually have it somewhere in my sermon. So I'm going to insert it here, but I haven't done it yet because I don't know how big to make it, because I don't know how much space I have, because I'm just doing a rough draft. So I do verse 15. I go through phrase by phrase. I build it up. I do a few word studies. I talk about, different ways that God spreads his tabernacle, how he cares for us. And then I go through this section here where I marvel at God's care. And these are all the phrases that talk about the specifics of what God spreading his tabernacle over us means. And John says, they will not hunger, they're not going to thirst, the sun's not going to be down on them, they're not going to have any suffer under the heat. All these things right here are just things that, follow the text all the way to the end. Then I kind of end with kind of Psalm 23, 1 through 6 as a cross-reference. I tell people to be encouraged. I have them look there, talk about the water of life, quote John 4, where Jesus speaks of himself as, having the water which somebody drinks will give them eternal life. And then I kind of clothe with these major points, see those clothed in white, know the identity of those clothed in white, marvel at those. These are my major points here. This is my conclusion. Remember, I told you at the beginning that the proposition is a summary of what you're going to tell them. The main body of the sermon is when you tell them, and the conclusion is when you tell them what you told them. So right here, I have, notice, 18 pages. Now, this works for me because remember, these are not full-size pages. These are the size of my iPad Pro screen, 11-inch iPad Pro screen. And so I'm going to, when I get it all done, I'll save it and then save it as a PDF and bring it up into my iPad using PDF Expert because it's super stable. I can mark it up more without having to mess up my notes. It works really good that way. And notice here at the end, I just have this really good quote from Spurgeon. This quote is really great. It talks about how God cares for us. And of course, that's what the second half of the sermon is all about, God's care for us. So one of my deacons shared this, and so I might put this in the sermon. But notice I'm at 18. 18 is like, that's going to give me an hour of sermon. And I haven't even looked at a single commentary yet. So we're going to stop here. I'm going to read a bunch of commentaries, put in anything I need to from the commentaries, go through it and refine it, go through it and refine it again. I'll do another video and kind of show you more of the final product. I'll probably go through it again after that, and then I'll preach it this Sunday. So that's how it works. I hope this helps. It's just kind of a survey, but I know just from practical experience and training guys that it's really helpful to see how this is done. It's one thing to hear a lecture on it or to read a book on it, but to visually see how a sermon is put together and how it grows and how it is refined and again, how it is preached is super helpful. So for now, we're going to shut down, and our next video will show you the kind of end product of what we do when we start looking at commentary. So at the beginning, I'm going to show you what I do, and then at the end, I'm going to show you the finished product. So kind of like this video. So until next time, stay in the Word.
DrivenNails.com is a user-supported ministry.